Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Power Pasha Pearls. I just came back from a 36-hour stint in Florida, attending a leadership summit where the key theme was addressing anti-Semitism of our day and age. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of what I shared with them in a couple of encapsulating two keynote addresses, but essentially to illustrate a very particular point. And to begin in the first instance, by way of analogy, Ishai Ribo is a 34-year-old Sephardic Jewish singer from a traditional Jewish family that emigrated from France to Israel. And on September the 11th, 2023, he did something that was previously deemed unimaginable. He played in Madison Square Gardens to a sellout audience. It was the first time in history that an Orthodox Jew performed there, let alone to 20,000 people. It was beautiful, it was peaceful, it was surreal. Fast forward to February 27th, 2024, just a little over 2 weeks ago, and he performed once more. Again, it was a sellout crowd, but a much smaller crowd because it wasn't taking place at Madison Square Gardens. It was taking place at Harvard University, put on by Chabad for the Jewish students. And the vibe in the room, it was electric. The vibe outside the room was toxic. There were police standing at the entrances just to protect those inside. There was chanting, there were placards, there was screaming, there was so much venom being spewed. We know the imagery. We know what that looks like. But it's a tale of two cities, two different eras, two distinct universes. What happened in just barely 6 months? What changed so much in so short a period of time? To say that Israel happened, the war with Gaza happened is too simplistic an answer. What really happened was the exposure of an uncomfortable truth that we had taken for granted for far too long. And that uncomfortable truth is that anti-Semitism is a light sleeper. The implication being that it's always there, albeit lurking underground, waiting for a reason to resurface. As irrational a phenomenon as anti-Semitism is, it has never been eradicated. At best, it's suppressed over a period of time because it's not fashionable. Society conditions us to curb our prejudices, but throughout the course of history, it has always been existent. And when opportunity lends itself, it rears its ugly head yet again. A perfect example from that is in the Purim story. Haman has the king's backing. Haman, by the decree of the king, has everybody in the 127 countries bowing down to him wherever he presents himself. The only one who didn't was Mordechai. And the Megillah actually tells us that as good as he felt, having been lifted to such lofty stature, he tells his wife and his family, "V'chol zeh einenu sheveli," none of this glory that has now been bestowed upon me is worth anything to me, kol zman, all the time that I see Mordechai the Jew. That's what he says. Einenu sheveli, it's meaningless to me every time I see Mordechai the Jew, which fills me with rage and with anger. And it begs the question, really? The world is your oyster, quite literally. One man doesn't bow, and that becomes your entire preoccupation. That becomes your whole focus. Yes, that's the irrationality of hatred. That's the irrationality of anti-Semitism. Maybe over the course of time, we've become a little too complacent. Maybe over the course of time, we've had it so good for so long that we didn't think it would manifest itself yet again, not to that extent. Maybe we assumed that the mantra, never again, if it was chanted enough times, then so shall it be. And of course, today the buzzword is no longer Jew. The post-Holocaust era has ensured that that taboo remains in place alongside other extreme forms of racial slur. So in place of Jew, we have Israel and Zionist, because hating Jews is no longer politically correct. Hating Israel and Israelis is the correct way to hate Jews today. So Haman has never gone away. Only then he was able to actually say Mordechai HaYehudi, Mordechai the Jew. And today he would have to say Mordechai the Zionist. But the same Haman exists. The same Haman emerges regardless. Now, some will argue, as they do, that being critical of Israel is not being anti-Semitic. And to be sure, of course, it's possible to criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. Israelis do it all the time. And while for some you can separate the two, for the overwhelming majority, the hard fact is, as we see, the lines have become fundamentally blurred. And reality speaks for itself. Because when a Jewish rabbi in Italy is attacked because of what's going on in Israel, and a Jewish businessman in France is attacked because of what's going on in Israel, and a Jewish professor in the United States is boycotted because of what's going on in Israel, or a Jewish student in London is cursed on the streets because of what's going on in Israel, that it's got nothing to do with Israel or Zionism or so-called occupation, and everything to do with Judaism, and anti-Semitism. Mainstream culture is finding cover for the age-old hatred of Jews. They figured it out. So long as the attack is battered and flash-fried in a light coat of anti-Israel sentiment, and as long as you pretend you're fighting for human rights, then the rise of anti-Semitism is socially acceptable. They tell of this traveling salesman, a Jewish traveling salesman, wherever he went, he made a conscious decision that he's always going to make sure to take his tallis and his tefillin and daven in shul. Problem was, when he came to Shropshire, and there isn't a synagogue for 100 square miles. So what does he do? He does the next best thing. He goes into his local church on a Sunday morning, and he sits at the back, and he decides, I'll pray here instead. And he's sitting there with his tallis and his tefillin, and people are coming in. It's Sunday after all. And after a while, the priest says, all those who feel that they don't belong here should please make their way to the exit. He sees people looking uncomfortable. This guy, he's oblivious. He's carrying on praying. And after a while, more and more people are coming in looking uncomfortable. The priest says, will all non-Jews please make their way to the exit? And this guy, walking away, tallis and tefillin, completely oblivious, finally the priest has enough, and he says, all Jews leave now. At which point the man stops, looks up, takes off his tallis, takes off his tefillin, packs it all up, puts it under one arm, walks to the front of the church, takes the statue of you-know-who off the cross, tucks it under his other arm, and he says, come on, Bubala, we're not wanted over here. Here's the point. Throughout the course of history, we have been told you're not wanted here. And many scholars and many historians, including many Jews themselves, will choose to view this ongoing obsession with the Jew not as something uniquely connected to Jews or Judaism, but as a multitude of isolated events resulting from distinct circumstances. Arabs hate Jews because we're occupiers. Germans hated the Jews because they were scapegoats for a depressed economy. Christians hated Jews because we supposedly killed their God. Stalin murdered Jews because they were capitalists, and Europeans in the Middle Ages loathed the Jew because of his financial success. But the hard fact is that anti-Semitism has existed too long in too many disparate cultures to tolerate a claim that in every instance it's because of some distinct factor disconnected from being Jewish. We've been hated because we were rich, because we were poor, because we were capitalists, because we were communists, because we believed in tradition, and because we were rootless cosmopolitans. The point is, anti-Semitism is not a belief. It penetrates everywhere. It's a virus. The human body has an immensely sophisticated immune system which develops defenses against viruses, but it gets penetrated because viruses mutate. Anti-Semitism mutates. The first final solution would have been back in the days of Haman. Today it just comes out in different guise, and that's what we're bearing witness to. And the point is, we can't bury our heads in the sand. We can't assume that this too shall pass. I mean, I'm sure, yes, please God, when things calm down in Israel, things will calm down everywhere else as well. But if there's one thing these past few months have shown us, is that those who hate us far more than we imagined. And no matter how calm things might become, we cannot afford to be complacent anymore. And yes, there are many who like us as well. And those who like us, frankly, like us a lot more than we imagined as well. And I suggest to you they are very much the majority, but they're very much a silent majority, which means after all said and done, it's down to us. Try as we may, we are always going to be limited in our capacity to weaken the enemy. And the only way that we can counter anti-Semitism is to strengthen ourselves. And the way we strengthen ourselves is by enhancing our own identity. I have borne witness to so many Jews otherwise never seen throughout the year suddenly coming out of the woodwork. I'm aware of numerous examples of Jews who had completely stopped identifying for years, suddenly reaching out looking to reconnect. And we have to appreciate and we have to encourage others to understand what it means to be Jewish in the 21st century. And we all have to hold our heads high and strengthen our own identity and appreciate where we are all coming from and what it really means to be Jewish, because the hard fact is that when we know what it means to be Jewish, then we will respect our own identity, and the world will always respect Jews who respect themselves. And they won't respect Jews who don't. We don't have to, and this has to be stressed, we don't have to be defined by anti-Semitism. We should not be defined by anti-Semitism. We are a people and a faith and a nation that strives and thrives. We're not a surviving nation, we're a thriving nation. We shouldn't allow ourselves to assume that, 3,300 years of Jewish continuity, and we have to live it ourselves so we can preserve that little corner in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest surviving persecuted minority. That's really not the point of it all. Coming back to the Purim story, that first attempted final solution by Haman. The Talmud famously explains how he scored his PR offensive with the king, Achashverosh. He concocted his own myths without context. He said, they're lazy. They don't work on the weekends and on the Jewish festivals. They won't eat our food. They won't marry our women, etc., etc. Later, Queen Esther, the heroine of the Purim story, steps up to counter in her plea to the king. And she discloses her Jewish identity, stating simply, Ki nimkarnu ani va'ami, these are my people and we are at risk. She tugs at his heartstrings and she averts the decree. So the following basic question is asked. But what about all those initial complaints that Haman brought? Everything he highlighted about our different laws, our different behavior, our different mindset, it's all true. And it swayed the king in the first instance. Esther doesn't seem to address any of that. So what changes the king's mind? And the answer is she does address it. She says, Ani ve'ami, these are my people. This is my identity. This is who I am. Achashverosh loved Esther's grace and her nobility. He loved her essence. He loved her soul. She says to the king, you love me. You love my essence. You know what my essence is? I am a Jew. These are my people. Yes, our laws are different. Is that a bad thing? So it defines me. Yes, we have days we don't work. Is that a bad thing? It's one of the things that makes me me and what you love about me. And the point is, to the ignorant hater out there who doesn't understand or appreciate or know anything about Judaism, of which there are plenty, maybe you can get into the nitty-gritty of the debate or explain yourself, but that will only make a difference to those who care enough to want to listen. But the ultimate retort to the irrational hatred out there is Ani ve'ami. This is who I am. Standing up tall with your head held high. And with the ever-increasing threat of anti-Semitism rearing its ugly head, in the face of all that, we have a very real choice to make. What can I do to let those powerful words, Ani va'ami, resonate? We have to teach ourselves not to be afraid to be different. We have to teach ourselves that it's better to be our hero walking alone in one direction than with a crowd going in the wrong direction. We have to teach ourselves that with every ugly protest condemning Israel while simultaneously attacking Jews, we stand that much straighter. And with every anti-Semitic, ignorant, malign hashtag tweeted, we wave our banner of pride that much higher. And with every odious demonstration and every lie fabricated and every abuse, we are that much prouder that we belong to a religion, to a nation, to a belief system where our optimism replaces pessimism and our faith exceeds our fears. So when we can inculcate ourselves and strengthen our own identity, then we understand that in as much as they tragically kill our brothers and sisters in Israel and they pitifully attack us on the streets of London or the campuses of Los Angeles, and we shed a tear and we cry and we lament. But then they'll never ever be able to break our spirit. Not then and not now. And therefore, we put a message out there by virtue of our own standing tall, a message of pride, of dignity that essentially declares loud and clear that we, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, have, are, and will live on forevermore. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom.